Good afternoon, members, and welcome to today's Insights Innovation webinar. Today, we are very lucky to have the team from Yahoo on the call, who are going to be presenting the future of data for a modern marketer. We have Julia Edwards, and also running today's presentation, we have Dan Richardson, Yahoo's Advertising Data and Insights Director. So without any further ado, I'll pass it over to Dan. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the introduction, Beck, and what a pleasure to be here on your Monday, taking you through some data education. So I hope you had a strong coffee, and we're going to kick off with about 40 minutes worth of learning here. I will be asking you to use the chat box a little bit, just to collaborate with me in line with the title of today's prezo, and also for a bit of interactivity. But we have lots to talk about, and as Beck mentioned, I look after data and insights across our business at Yahoo, across Australia and Southeast Asia. And really, my team is working very collaboratively with your independent agencies, particularly around targeting, audience insights, measurement, privacy, and sometimes hanging out and having fun too, which we like to do. But before I get into that, I would really like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Ku-ring-gai people where I'm coming to you from today, and that is at the northern end of Sydney. Some of you may be familiar with it. That's where I live. So the Ku-ring-gai people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and emerging. So we have lots to go on to today. That's my intro done. But I thought I'd start off with a couple of things, three things in fact, that we've been observing when we are sitting across the table from yourselves and from clients and talking about data, having a coffee or maybe doing a session. And what our real focus is, and what we've noticed on, is that many clients are really starting to tap into and work on defining their data maturity journey. What does that actually mean to them? And I'll explain how we look at that and how we index things like data maturity in a moment. We also are really focused on how first-party data is crucial to integrating with everything you do when you're working with Yahoo, but this obviously applies to all of your partners. And then our approach to privacy by design for the identityless internet, which I'll explain a bit more later. Just some top statements. But before I get on to more of it, this is where I want you to contribute. So how confident would you say that you are with working with customer data and identity? So identity, just to explain what that could be, it might be online identifiers like cookies or mobile device IDs, building those audiences, looking at people coming to your website or your app. It could be working with offline data sets, so sales data, customer data. But the end point is bringing that all together to deliver some form of marketing effectiveness or data-driven marketing campaign. So in your day-to-day job, everyone who's on the call, I want you to give me a rating. 1 would be low confidence, so not using it much, and 5 would be absolute data science expert, data Yoda, basically. All right, go for it. Give me a rating. All right, we've got a 5. What have we got there? A 4. Thanks, Mark. It also helps me understand where everyone's headspace is on the call, so I can make sure that I get the right level of detail. Thanks, Darren, Andrew, 2s, 4s, 3s. What about Judith, Bowen? Thanks, Judith. Angie, Munlu, Lee. 3, 3, 3. Thanks, Melissa. Excellent. Okay, good. Thanks, Kobe. Great to see. We got a bit of work to do. That's good. Thanks for being so open about that. So I mean, I'd actually rate myself as probably about a 4. And the reason is, we're a publisher, we're a tech partner, we have our own consumers or customers that we're working with, but essentially we're marketers as well. Essentially, in my team, I'm not a data scientist, I'm not an engineer, but I have been, like you, doing a lot of learning to try and understand all of these changes and then bring them into my day-to-day role and create these types of education moments that my team has actually been really enjoying doing. So let's look at some numbers though, and if I draw on some information from Accenture, they're doing a lot of work around transformation of brands and their digital core, transforming that so it's ready for tech and regulation changes, but it could easily be an agency who is building out this speciality as some of you already are, around consulting for data maturity. But we know that, looking at this information, 55% of companies have a mostly manual approach to discovering data in their enterprise. So it's a bit tough. And then 28%, according to this research, actually have a strategy in place to take advantage of it. So there is a lot of work that's going on right now to transform all of these different data assets into something that can actually be used, and used in an easy way to be applied for better customer experiences. If we look at some of the other stats that are coming out from the market, there's been a big focus on things like customer data platforms, and I'll go into those a bit more later and why they're important. But essentially, there are some really common threads happening between marketers and their tech vendors, which are challenges. TLM describes it as sometimes trying to solve a problem with sticky tape and string. There's a lot of chat around disparate data silos and bringing them together. Integrating with all of your partners and getting the pipes in place is tricky. And again, down there from Segment, which is a new CDP by Twilio, all about bringing those disparate data silos together to have a single customer view across online and offline, and being able to actually use that to deliver on an outcome. Some other, I guess, more brutal or less eloquent feedback from the industry recently asked marketers, what do they think about their investment in marketing technology? And a third said they're just starting out. Another third said they're on the journey. And the final third said it's a bloody nightmare and no one wants to touch it. So, it is really important that we all get upstream and start to understand how marketers are facing these challenges, because it's our job to deliver campaign effectiveness, to future-proof businesses for the future, but we might not even have our hands on that customer data technology or working directly with it. So it's a really interesting dynamic at the moment between what partners like ourselves and agencies are expected to do, but how much we can actually go in and change or control or have access to that data. So these are the things which we're hearing when we do sit down and ask some questions. And these are quotes which we've taken over the past 6 to 9 months, where we've been really focusing on the challenges of tech and regulation and data maturity. And the first is, sometimes people say, no, we don't have enough useful data. We might have grown the volume of data, particularly online advertisers, exponentially during the last couple of years, particularly with all the conditions, macroeconomic or COVID, but we don't actually have a good way to use it. It's not useful, or we don't know how to easily activate the data, or what's going to happen when the tech and the laws change. So specific to Australia, the proposed privacy reform from the Attorney General's Department, which has been reviewed by the Australian government, and then of course changes to third-party cookies, with Chrome starting to phase out 1% of those at the end of this year, and then all of them in about a year's time. We'll go into a lot more detail, and I please wanted to encourage you, if you do have a question, pop it in the chat box, and I'm really happy to have answer a question, or we can leave it to the end. This is also going to be recorded and put up on IMA, YouTube as well, so whatever you like, but no question is too simple. So let's look at the first one, and it's all about having access to the right data. So when we work with a brand and we sit down, we look at things like data foundations. The first is to assess the different types of data which are being collected. So if you're an online business, you'll be collecting cookies from your web browser. So those will be first-party cookies if they're being generated by your own code on your own website. They're deemed to be third-party data points if that piece of code is being placed there by a company that is not the same as the web domain. So that could be a partner who's tracking conversions, it could be verification, it could be any type of measurement. There's lots of different stuff that's happening there. Other types of data would be customer data. This is really important because it's moving away from things which are collected freely, like a cookie, to actually consent-based information, a phone number or an email, an address, personal information. And you'll hear marketers talking about moving beyond first-party data to zero-party data sometimes. And basically that means you're having a conversation with the customer. So they understand what data is being collected and how that's being used. And that's different to how we've just collected people's web browser cookies freely when they visit our site and then retarget them over the years. So you're bringing together all the different types of data you're collecting there and understanding what you're working with. You're also looking at how you can collaborate with other data providers or people to enrich your offering. I'll explain how that's the future of that is happening in a moment with things like data clean rooms, but essentially you never know everything that you need to know about your customer, but you can meet in the middle. And with a common identifier, you can bridge together two data sets to say, okay, I know that my audience is 35 to 54 and like doing all these things, but this other person is or company is going to tell me a little bit extra about them. So that's, you'll often hear that referred to as data enrichment. Finally, it's about data collaboration. So meaningful partnerships. How could they drive innovation for your brand and value for that investment? We've got a great case study later on that talks to this, but really it's the gold standard. And we know that data collaboration drives growth and innovation. It's not easy, whether it's interdepartment in your business or working with tech and publish partners or data partners, but that's what we're really aiming for. So let's think about data maturity indexing. So this term is being used a bit more frequently, and I've noticed that, you know, when speaking to agencies in the past 9 months or so, there's an emerging specialism, which is adding on to the traditional areas of specialism, such as campaign measurement, attribution, and setting up things related to campaign performance, to really understanding, you know, what other services do we need to provide to clients to make sure that they can continue to run their business in the face of changes from tech and regulation. So you'll know that there's a lot of time and energy right now, which is going into migrating analytics from Google Analytics to Google Analytics 4, so the upgrade there, and the consideration and time that has to go into that. There's a lot of changes which are happening, and also things like auditing websites for pixels to understand which ones are critical versus which ones are legacy, and maybe sending information to third parties that you don't want to be on there anymore. So there's all these different levels of services which are popping up, which you can use to help win business, to drive more value out of your media investment that you're managing, or to maybe create an additional business area where you have different service or head hours. So if we think about data maturity indexing, that's one of those areas. And basically, if we're looking at how we work with you and support you as a partner at Yahoo, it's just about being aligned to what you need most, and being, you know, making sure that we use the best resources, because time's money. So if we look at level one, and you can probably guess by the shape of the slide, there's 4 different areas. But I just want you to think about, you know, where your main clients might sit, and, you know, how useful this type of thinking would be if you are, you know, onboarding a new client as well. So if we look at level 1, data aware, they acknowledge that first-party data is critical. They're using it very basically, and they're collecting data from different sources, maybe web, app, or offline, but they haven't brought it together. It's in disparate silos. It hasn't been cleaned up yet. So they're working on that. They're collecting it. They've probably got a data lake, but, you know, bringing all of that data into a cloud-based service, maybe it's AWS or Azure or whatever, or using other tech, that's a bit further down the road for them. Level 2 would be data connected. So they're mostly using third-party data. So that could be online-based third-party data, which they're buying through their ad buying platforms, or it could be data from data traders. So the emergence of things like retail media is quite significant. So looking at purchases online or in store, and then bringing them into targeting segments or attribution. So Cartology or Unpacked by Flybuyers, Coles 360, starting to, you know, be on the radar yet, but they're probably not using that stuff just yet, but they are interested. They're working really hard to turn their insights into actions. They could be online insights, it could be survey-based, but they're still on the journey there, and partnerships are underutilized. So, you know, data collaboration is probably not happening yet. There's a big jump actually to data level 3, which is data collaborative. So first-party data is used for decision-making and personalization for all customers. So ideally full funnel personalization, but it might just be online. Simple tactics such as dynamic creative or suppressing existing customers and having some sort of decisioning there, having some sort of customer segmentation in place. Partnerships are being used effectively for insights, for targeting, for measurement. They're exploring machine learning models as well. So you'll know that machine learning needs to be trained or learn from an initial set of data. So for us, that could be people who are visiting Yahoo and who are logged in, and we understand things about them, age, gender, interests, and we can actually use machine learning to find other people across the internet who look like them. I'll go into our next gen audiences later on, but basically there's some really exciting stuff happening with using anonymous data signals to feed into machine learning to help understand who people are on the internet, but without all of the fingerprinting or cross-device tracking, which people find to be a little bit creepy. But machine learning and AI are really on the radar for level 3. We've also got real-time insights are being activated against too, so they could be online, it might be sales data, but it's feeding into the platform and helping optimize. So it's quite advanced stuff. Now, this would be, you'd be a 5 out of 10 if you are in level 4, but you're using highly personalized experiences for all users. Data is driving core product and strategy. So you've really implemented an organizational design which is able to decentralize the way which you are driving data fluency or education across your business. So everyone kind of knows the basics of good governance, good data lifecycle management, privacy. You're not just asking marketing people to learn IT security or vice versa. You've decentralized that knowledge and you're working potentially to shared OKRs, customer-centric OKRs across the business. So there's really a culture of collaboration that has been decentralized, but you have centralized the ownership of that data and how that can be used in a safe and compliant way within a small data center of excellence or key decision makers there. So you are in a really good shape when it comes to the next point, security and data handling. So, that would typically be a select few sort of enterprise clients at the moment, but we know it's not easy because there keeps being data breaches popping up all the time. So there's a lot of different stuff happening here. And believe me, this is actually just a very top line sweep over data maturity indexing. You could dig right deeper into them and unpack them, but it is useful for understanding, what your client needs right now. And we found that quite useful. So now's the time to invest in first-party data. You know that already. I mentioned governance. I mentioned looking into customer data platforms. I'll explain a little bit more about CDPs in a moment. Definitely explain a little bit more about data clean rooms because I have a question for you on that. And establishing a clear value exchange to encourage registration or what we'd say in the moment value conversations. If you are just waiting until your customer's insurance is due, or you need to maybe re-permission them to use their data, then that's the wrong way of going about it. You need to find a way to hit what's called their brand love drivers. And Julia on the call and I will remember talking about our brand love research a few years back, but it doesn't have to be just coupons, loyalty, discounts and offers. It can be a sense of community. It can be entertainment. There are many ways to engage with your customers to encourage registration and to help them say, yep, I'm fine with my data being used because I get a great service. And beyond loyalty and offers and direct marketing. The final one is to find trusted identity partners. So for us at Yahoo, we have a very big focus on direct-to-consumer, first-party logged-in users as our seed. We're interoperable with other partners as well, and I'll talk about identity later and how we're taking a flexible approach there. So let's get on to the next quote, which I had before, which is, we don't know how to easily activate the data. And that brings us to data collaboration, which has some really positive and amazing opportunities which are happening in our industry, but is also getting a little bit trickier as well. There's a lot of information out there which you can probably read. I'm privy to a fair bit, having previously chaired the IB Data Council, but working, to understand things from Tech Lab and the government. But I'd highly recommend jumping into your search engine after this and typing in the IAB Australia Data Collaborations Platform Explainer. There's a link in this preso as well. There's also a new one called the ID Explainer Guide. These have a great glossary of terms which explain all the different ways which data collaboration is being done, and some useful things to learn as well, including data clean rooms. Now, we are aware there's a lot of stuff happening. There are a lot of acronyms. I've been on in many meetings or panels where we have a swear jar for using an acronym. There's heaps just on this page. I mean, seriously, WTF, what does it even mean? Particularly going into the ins and outs of DMP versus CDP, data clean room, and then the different IDs. So here's everything on a page just for you to take home and have in your back pocket. And we'll break out how each of these work in a little bit more detail, particularly the first four. So let's look at where a data management platform sits. So a data management platform, they were designed to collect data from web browsers. Thanks, Lee. Cheers, mate. They were designed to collect data from cookies from web browsers, collect data from apps, essentially online data, and to help publishers and brands bring all that together to aggregate or to understand audiences, to form segments for targeting. And they've been used for many years on both brand and agency or publisher side to do that. So for publishers, it might be creating audiences and attaching them to inventory or programmatic deals. And for brands, it might be segmenting people based on where they were in the funnel on your website. But the trouble is, a lot of that stuff is getting a bit trickier, because if you're using cookies, then your ability to apply them across the internet has got a lot smaller, particularly if you're looking to reach people outside of your own website. So that's where we've seen the evolution of things such as customer data platforms, which kind of sit a bit more upstream, because they can bring offline identifiers which are consent-based, such as an email or a phone number, or customer data sets, which are not blocked. They're not based on cookies, and they can be encrypted. So a typical way of doing that would be, instead of having your email or phone number or cookie all sitting separately, you can map them all to one user, and that user's ID might be ABC123. And that can be mapped across the ecosystem to other partners or inventory, but it's bringing that offline data set in, which is really critical and consent-based. I'm going to go on to explaining data clean rooms for a moment. Now, this is really interesting. When I did this presentation a few days ago, we had about 100 or more people in the crowd. And I said, who's heard of a data clean room? And I actually had maybe 1 or 2 people put their hand up. So using your emojis now, put your hand up if you've heard of a data clean room. You can give me a thumbs up. Yeah, thanks, Jules. Good. You got 1, 2. Beck, raise your hand. Would you like to ask a question? Yeah, okay, you've raised your hand. Nice. So 3 people? Excellent. 4, thanks, Darren. Excellent. And I'm going to pick on you again, Darren. Out of your sort of level of knowledge, 1 would be heard of a data clean room, and 5 would be using a data clean room proficiently. Where would you rate yourself? Give me a number, Darren. 1. Great. Okay, thank you. Thanks for participating, mate. Appreciate that. So let's explain what a data clean room is. Essentially, we can think about it in this, and I do have a story to explain it in a moment, but we can think about it like 2 partners coming together with a shared outcome that they have in mind. So they're coming together in a safe space. That's the data clean room. And their shared sort of outcome is that they want to understand 1 of 4 areas. So that could be their audience overlap. So partner 1 might be an advertiser, and partner 2 might be a publisher with web and app and logged in users. And partner 1, the advertiser, would like to understand what is the overlap between their customer data set and then the publisher's logged in or addressable users. So then they can know how many they can reach or target and measure across the internet, including browsers that are blocking third-party cookies. And this is a very common thing to do right now. I know agencies are working on addressable planning and activation platforms so that your whole setup is not just based on identifiers which are being eroded. Because we know that about 30% are already being eroded, and up to 70% by this time next year will be gone due to cookie blocking. The other thing is measurement and attribution. So one thing which the changes of the internet, particularly from Apple and Google, has done is made it a lot harder to do attribution. So that could be someone who clicked on your ad whilst in a browser such as Safari or Firefox or Chrome in the future, and then gone through to convert later. Now we know that we can amend the pixel or code a little bit to try and preserve that click-through conversion and get it through to a campaign. You can do that with a pixel or a conversion API. But we also know that things like iOS 17 and link protection is starting to make that a lot harder. We know that multi-touch attribution, so looking at the contribution of each channel and ad exposure to an end result, is getting harder as well. We know that Google is changing that up in their analytics. So that's getting a little bit harder. So this is where you can use a data clean room to match data sets using things like customer identifiers and try and reach a shared outcome there. You can also enrich your profile. So if partner 2, the publisher, is bringing in different attributes about their logged in users, and they can map their users to yours, you can start to understand other behaviors or purchasing interests and do that in the clean room to get a better view of who your audience really is. That's really interesting, particularly if you're a brand that only collects website browser cookies or customer emails or phone numbers, but for a very specific cause. Maybe you're selling pet supplies online, but you really want to know about the travel behaviors or financial behaviors. So that's what a data clean room can help do. Now, targeting and frequency capping is great as well, because you can really dig down to user level attributes and understand what's going on there. But I know that I promised I had an example to bring this to life, because it's much better than a flowchart. In fact, I don't even like using flowcharts if I don't have to. We'll leave them for the appendix. Let's use the example of a coffee machine. So if you came into the Yahoo office, which you're all welcome to do, you would see that we have a coffee machine. Now, it's bigger than your usual Breville barista that you might have at home. It's the one with the coffee and the milk kind of built in, grinds itself, and I'll explain why that's important. So firstly, the coffee machine access is limited. You need to be an employee, you need to have a security pass. You also need to have a level of skill as well. So personally, I have a bit of trouble with the coffee machine in our office because I don't really know how to use it, but I do know who makes a good coffee from that machine. There's a few people floating around. So there's a certain level of specialism required to use a clean room, and multiple ways to interact with it. Maybe it's, long back's pretty easy. If you want an almond milk flat white, good luck to you. You'll need to find a way to get that into the milk system. But the important thing, if we think about the previous slide, was that we have 2 different partners. So on this slide, you'll see the partners are the milk and the coffee. So the milk produced totally and independently by some amazing cows out in the farm, and then the coffee has been roasted to perfection, maybe in Colombia or somewhere else. And both parties have never actually had the chance to mingle or overlap anything together before. They're coming together with a shared outcome as data contributors. So the shared outcome, we could say, that is an overlap study. Now, the important thing to think about with clean rooms, and I should have mentioned this before, is that it is end-to-end encrypted. So this is really significant. It means there's a series of lock and key relationships that allow data to be mapped together in a way that each party cannot re-identify their audience. So if we go to the next slide again, the coffee can never go in and start to identify where the milk's come from or anything about it, and vice versa. but the shared outcome is an overlap. And that's basically all they can do in there. It's pre-agreed upon. So the process, the data is cleaned. So it's made sure that it is the right data signals. Think about back to data foundations. It is compliant. So consent has been applied where it needs to, particularly for personal data. It's been analyzed. And then there's other things which you can use as well. I won't get into privacy enhancing technologies or OPJA, open private join, but you can use more than one partner in a clean room. So as you get to know more about clean rooms, you'll hear about multi-party collaboration. So for example, an advertiser might want to map their audience to multiple publishers to understand their overlap, to inform planning and buying. The end result is that these two users are responsible for crafting the output and connecting that to an endpoint. So the endpoint would be the cup, and then the coffee or the overlap study goes into the cup, but the data remains encrypted end to end, and no party can be re-identified. This is actually a way which businesses are collaborating as well. If you think about businesses which operate in a cooperative or a franchise or a consortium model, or maybe you've got different data owners in your business between performance and branding. So there's many ways to use this, and some of them, the enterprise model clean rooms are quite big and maybe pricey, but there are pay-as-you-go models, I understand. And then at Yahoo, we have a free data clean room which you can use to understand your overlap with our audience, or maybe bring your custom algorithm in as well. So there's lots of different options, but it's great to start exploring them, because the feedback from the government and the Attorney General's Department is that clean rooms could be a good way for data collaboration in the future, which signals that us as an industry are actually doing a bit of self-monitoring and displaying good governance, self-regulating. And so it's really important we can demonstrate that. But lots of different outcomes there. I'm not going to go into clean rooms too much more, but I hope that gives you a taste of how they might be being used, and maybe some of your brands are using those already to map data to partners, to share data or collaborate for an agreed outcome. So we're on to the next section. That's all about tech and governance changes, of which there have been many. In fact, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we know that the government accepted 68 clauses which are proposed to them around privacy reform by the Attorney General's Department. In principle, they accepted those in principle. We know that 38 were still under consideration, and that the rest were not agreed with. So it's very much in progress. But what we are knowing is that it's a valuable dialogue which is happening to try and explain how the internet works, but with a couple of things in mind. Those being preservation of sensitive categories, so children, predatory gambling, other things, health data, and the provision of sensible segmentation. Because we know that customers do want personalization. They do expect to see localized content or relevant content and offers, not just from brands, but from the government and other service agencies. So there has to be an allowance for that as well. We also know that some people are still getting on the journey here, and you might hear about Cookie-geddon, Chroma-geddon, death of the cookie. A lot of focus has been on Google. But if you think about Australia, about half of the people on the call right now or in Australia are probably using an iPhone or maybe on a Mac. And Apple actually started blocking third-party cookies back in 2017. So that could be a pixel from a partner who wants to track a conversion. It might be from verification. It could be very different use cases there. But this is basically all coming to a head, and by this time next year, what we know is there'll be no more third-party cookies. We also know that Australians want some answers too. So based on the most recent information, this is from the Australian Information Commissioner's survey, Community Attitudes to Privacy, which has just been released. We know that 32% of Aussies feel in control of their data privacy, which is pretty low, right? There's a bit of a problem there. We also know that 89%, want government to legislate change. So there's a real thirst for action. But there's a lot of nuances in there. So, if I said to any of you on the call, how many of you are using an iPhone? we know that's around 50 to 60%. But then if I said to you, how many of you have read the terms and conditions when you downloaded an app last time to understand how data is being collected and used? Actually, is there anyone on the call that actually has read terms and conditions for an app that's been downloaded or used? Kobe, I can see you smiling. No, no one. Okay. But I'm sure you're concerned about data and privacy. Now, this is my last one. I need you to give me a thumbs up here. Has anyone opted out of location tracking or any form of tracking when prompted to do so by an app in their iPhone? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Okay. So look, there's a bit of a gap here. And this is, there's a couple of things for us to consider. The first is that Apple is a fantastic marketer. Apple equals privacy. It's a fantastic ad, gold standard campaign, beautiful product as well. But it doesn't quite go into the nuances of how the open internet works. And my point is, as practitioners of marketing here, we need to drive data fluency throughout our organizations. Remember, I said before about decentralizing that knowledge. We need to drive data fluency across our organizations if we have any hope of educating consumers on the value of their data in those contextual moments, whether they're in store or online, to get that conversation happening. So hopefully today is contributing a little bit more to that as well. So how many data points does it take to re-identify someone? Let's have a volunteer on the call. How many data points? Kobe, I'm going to pick on you because I can see your face and you're smiling. Give me a number. 5? Excellent. Okay. So we know that using 15 data points, researchers can identify 99% of people. Now, who would actually like to give me a guess about the minimum number of data points that people could use to re-identify someone? It's a bit lower. Give me a guess. 3. Excellent. Thanks, Beck. You're spot on, mate. Using just 3, they can still identify 83% of people. And this is essentially where the regulation is looking at. How can data points be used beyond just email and phone number to re-identify someone? And if I think back, when I was starting in media, you'd really only talk about things like personally identifiable information when a phone number or an email came into the equation. These days, it's a really expanded definition. So if we look at what the Privacy Act is reviewing here, it potentially is the most impactful changes to AU and the digital advertising industry ever. It's really looking at beyond personally identifiable information to other identifiers, which I'll talk about in a moment, and how they could be brought into the regulation or restricted. It's talking about consent. So whether that consent can be made easy for consumers or federated across the internet, or whether everyone has to ask for consent. We don't want consent fatigue. What does consent look like? There's also costs associated with collecting consent and having that sitting in a consent management platform. Cost to the economy, cost to businesses. Obviously, the pop-up banners that say, "Do you accept cookies?" are pretty redundant, and everyone just ignores those. So we have to do something. But all this is being considered alongside how are we defining data trading or data targeting. There's lots of different nuances there. There's targeting through direct marketing. There's targeting through online segmentation. So that's why it's such a big project, but a very necessary and worthwhile project. So I'm going to use a story to explain how this all works. So if we look at the airport, so I travel a little bit for work, but if you think about every time you go through the airport, the X-ray area, they're able to look at what's inside of your bag. So in this case, you'll see you've got a photographer going to Europe, maybe on the left. You've got someone going for a tropical holiday in the middle. And then on the right, you've got your family holiday because you've got your bunnies and your hairdryer stuff on the top. I don't think that suitcase is getting shut anytime soon. But if you looked at my suitcase, you would probably see a bunch of business shirts stuffed in last minute, some running gear and running clothes, and a whole bunch of Hydrolyte and Panadols. So you could either think that I am like a business person running a marathon, or maybe I'm just preparing for canning cans with lots of hydrolyte. But, you know, you can kind of start to infer what I'm doing. But what you can't do is, you know, ask me my name, my phone number, my address without taking me off into a separate room and getting my permission to do that. And that's essentially what's happening with the way the regulation is moving. So it's moving to what could be deemed personal data, or data which could be used to reasonably identify a person based on mapping all of that together. And these are the types of things which we are using every day as digital marketers and have been using freely for a very long time, starting with technical data. So your device ID, so that could be an Apple IDFA or a Google ID. I've got an Android, so for me it's a Google ID. And that is used to do many things. You'll know it's being used for out of home, whether it's static, digital, programmatic, to understand how cohorts of users might have the opportunity to see a particular screen within a certain radius and time of it playing. It's being used to map whether they also saw other things online and walk into stores or online. If you're using IP address, we know that that is used by brands and the government and many providers to determine local and relevant content. It's also, again, if you think about all the devices in your house, they're all connecting to a common IP address, and that's how we do things like household mapping. That helps us understand viewership. If we look at linear terrestrial television versus streaming apps, whether it's digital ad insertion or on demand or catch up, that household map is using an IP address. So that's technical data. I talked about location data there as well with device ID. Lat long is obviously really important for mapping the location of out-of-home sites and also store visits. And then you've got behavioral data, so affinity-based audiences, which have typically been made up of, you know, bunches of cookies or devices of people who were interested in a new small SUV. So there's changes happening to that too, which I'll mention in a moment. But basically, any separate data when linked together that could reasonably identify a person is all in scope. For consumers, so that's us, we're not just marketers, remember, it's about control, it's about the ability to opt out or erase or be forgotten altogether. So if you'd open up a new search browser now and you typed in Yahoo Privacy Center, you could go in and control what you see, opt out, or you could opt out of our identity graph altogether, which I don't want you to do, obviously, but that's very easy for people to do that. And that's really important that we have that control, because we have a direct relationship with consumers and our own ID product, Yahoo Connect ID. We can make that happen like that. And that's a really important thing for us. This slide, definitely too long, didn't read, but we'll send it out, and it really breaks down what I've been talking about in more of those technical details. This is actually the distillation of about 30 pages. So my team has been working really hard to digest all that information. And if you've met Lorraine in my team, she's absolutely amazing and loves this stuff. So we're keen to have a chat, but obviously a lot of information there. So where do we go from here? We know that advertisers are working hard and the consumers see the benefit in data sharing. We know that the internet sits in two different camps. It's fair to say that the industry has been focused quite aggressively on the left-hand side on addressable users. So those are users where you have a first-party cookie, ID, or identifier to make sure we're future-proofing and getting away from relying on third-party cookies. For us, it's Yahoo Connect ID. So that's based on 5 million logged-in users in Australia. It's our solution there, but also used by 28,000 other publisher domains. We've actually taken a really flexible approach and taken that out of our ecosystem as well, started putting that in major other supply-side platforms, and it's also powering Yahoo Backstage, which I'll mention a bit more in a minute, because it actually shows how identity can help power sustainability and transparency, which are two key value drivers for agencies. And then on the right-hand side, we have our next-gen solutions as well. So these are people who are on a Firefox or a Safari, or I think it was about 6 of you have opted out on your iPhones. You're basically unknown. So the brands are finding it very hard to target you or measure you already. So we need to use technology across web and app, which can access the information that's available and model that using things like machine learning against our known seed of people on the left to try and deliver targeting and measurement, but in a privacy-centric way. I've got a bit of an explainer into how next-gen solutions work in a moment. If you haven't seen Yahoo Backstage already, the reason which identity plays such a big role is that we're able to maintain all of that great infrastructure and technology we've had as a supply-side platform for over 10 years, particularly our header bidder, to insert that addressable audience ID from Yahoo, or also from a brand or a participating publisher. An example here is 9, so that's just one example. It could be any publisher in there, but really it's a tool which allows agencies to say, okay, we really like that inventory and we want to future-proof that with identity, but we want to have a transparent discussion across the supply path. We want to understand how the inventory can come in and what rate we can negotiate that directly with that publisher. Of course, we know that when an ad impression goes through a supply-side platform, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, it's not just one buyer, right? Thanks, Sandy. It's actually farmed out or multiplied. They're called bid multipliers to many other buyers. It increases the waste, the carbon waste particularly. So what we're able to do is actually cut that out and have a direct conversation, which is transparent, which is cost effective through Backstage. So that's something you hear us talk to you a lot more about in the future, but identity underpins that. Next gen or artificial intelligence is an area which is really taking off in many areas. I'm not here to talk about ChatGPT or whatever. I'm here to talk about how we use available signals on the internet for unknown or non-addressable users. So that could be your device type, your operating system, the weather, the time of day, things which are not in that personally identifiable or personal data spectrum. I'm talking about how we can use those and validate them in real time against our known data set, against those real-time signals, to infer age, gender, interest, or likelihood to convert if you're sharing that with us with a pixel or a customer ID, to actually reach audiences and deliver return on investment across the unknown internet. So we actually have next-gen audiences on by default for all of you if we're not able to use a first-party cookie, device ID, or another type of customer data set. So that's already working hard across web and app. And the only other thing similar to this might be Google's proposed cohort targeting, or Flocks. It's part of their sandbox, and that's across their Chrome browser, where we're not just solving for one browser, we're trying to solve for the entire internet. We've worked really hard to make sure you can safely and securely bring your data into our environments as well. So for some of the bigger, more enterprise clients, they might be using some of these customer data platforms. That means they can bring them in and activate them on marketing, pass back information on who's seen the ads or conversions, and do that safely and securely to deliver personalization insights and, more importantly, value. Because we know that these things can easily become a cost center if not used properly. And we know that the average tenure of a CMO is getting shorter and shorter. So they want to see action, and it's really our job to work with you to make sure this data can be activated easily. We've worked hard on omnichannel measurement as well, and bringing together all these things which used to be point solutions into one single offering. So within the Yahoo DSP, we've now released the opportunity to look at attention metrics. So the memory and memory encoding, the emotional response of people looking at ads, not just viewability. So that's launched with Adelaide pre-bid audience targeting, with Amplified Intelligence and Amplified Prove, which we're piloting this quarter, and Playground XYZ. We're launching our brand lift studies with Lucid and Nielsen Visual DNA, and that's complemented by offline studies with Unpacked by Flybys as well, and all the targeting and location measurement and targeting with Near. But it's all in one place, so we hope that makes that easier for you to access and integrates that to actually deliver better results for next year. Ultimately, it's about connected partnerships for us. And I mentioned collaboration before. Now, I wanted to share this case study with you. If you've seen it already, just sit back. But if you haven't, it's really significant, because what this represents is, firstly, a place that probably not many people wanted to go in the middle of winter, which is Tassie. It's bloody freezing. But the off-season campaign really set out to change that. We use programmatic digital out of home, combined with first-party data from our audience insights tool, from JC2Co and our integration with Adobe, and location intelligence from Near to understand who'd seen the ads across channels and then gone to Tassie, to actually deliver a 51% increase in travel from exposed users in the middle of winter, and they were 5 times more likely to do that, to visit a tourist attraction than go to the pub. But if you break that down, it's data collaboration and sharing around audience enrichment, overlap, and measurement between an agency, a brand, a publisher or tech partner, an out-of-home company, a location company, and Adobe DMP. So bringing all that together. Now, it can be done if you have the right things in place. And that's how we'd really love to work with yourselves in 2024, because we know that first-party data is still chronically underutilized and it's getting harder, and that data collaboration drives growth and innovation. So we really want to activate solutions today to protect tomorrow's strategies for you. So we're at the end of the preso. You might want to think, how do I rate myself now that I've seen this information? Am I still sitting at a 2 or a 3? Or maybe I've gone up or down. You don't have to put it in the box there, but it's nice to just reset at the end here. And if you want some more answers, we run some really cool bite-sized little education sessions around everything we've talked about today. We'd be happy to come in, have a coffee, and walk through what we know. And these things change every 3 months because the internet and regulation changes all the time. But we also do strategic innovation workshops as well, which can break down data collaboration and insights and bring in our Yahoo creative studios. So lots of options for you. But that's the end of today's preso. And I know we're pretty much out of time. So I'll hand back to Beck to wrap up. Thank you.
That was a really amazing, informative session. Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you, Julia, who's also on the call today. Look, that's a wrap on today's Insights Innovation webinar. We will, as they've said, upload it to our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the Yahoo team directly or contact myself or Nikki, and we will send you their contact details over. Have a great week, everybody, and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining.